The main feature tonight, which is our look at Serco, and I've got to take my hat off to Lance Murdoch, who is MC Double L, he calls himself, and here he is speaking, and I was really blown away by this, last Saturday down in Bournemouth, at part of something called the Stand-Up protest, outside Bournemouth Town Hall, and apparently he's going to be back there 2 p.m, tomorrow, doing another one, similar one, and I just think he's done an incredible job here. Not only in speaking out, because you know he's limiting his potential career by doing this, but also by really taking out and taking down the role of Serco, particularly during this pandemic. But also, you know, we've been following them for many years on here, Martin, haven't we? This outsourcing company, which is like a giant octopus, basically taking over all sorts of roles that government used to do, but doing it for private profit. I mean, this is a conservative, you know, when I say conservative, it's a Tory project, really, because it also has Conservatives running it. So let's have a listen to that now. Then we'll hear some of his music, and then we'll hear from Lance, an extended interview with Lance about what he thinks is really going on.
The infrastructure of our entire test and trace system, the enforcement, is run by a company called Serco. Has anybody heard of Serco?
Yeah.
The Serpent Company. Right, now before I tell you about Serco, this is how it works. The law changed 2 weeks ago. If you are asked to isolate for any reason, you do not need a test, you do not need symptoms. You can get a little notification on your phone saying stay at home, and you can get a £1,000 fine, and if you break the rules you get up to a £10,000 fine. This is administered by Serco, okay? Who are Serco? Here we go.
Go on, Lance.
Right, Serco are the multinational company that employ more people than British Armed Services, 125,000 people. They've got 40 subsidiary companies across the globe. They are the largest outsourcing company in the world, and they win 70% of the contracts they bid for. They turn over £5 billion a year. Here's a short look into what they do. They cover waste disposal all over the UK, transport, half of London's traffic lights, all of Dublin's. Ontario, Canada, they issue your driving licence. In New Zealand, trains, ferries, all across the UK too. In Australia, they have a presence on every single military base. That's just in Australia. Serco are contracted to run the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. Does anybody know what FEMA is? They administer and run 2 whole FEMA camps worth $600 million. 17 states they run FEMA. Immigration detention centres across the UK, Australia and New Zealand. Air traffic control across the whole world. Public transport in the West and in the Middle East is dominated by Serco. That means the ANPR cameras. That means the facial recognition cameras. They run, own and maintain all of that infrastructure. They are contracted for the DWP call centres. They're the largest operator of private prisons in the UK. Who knew that it's not just the US that has private for-profit prisons? They're in the UK too, and they're run by guess who? Serco, the Serpent Company. They run every single state school in Bradford between 2001 and 2011. In that decade, kid me not, was that not the decade when the grooming, industrialised raping of young girls was most prevalent in the North East? They ran all of the schools in Bradford. Political persuasions aside, that happened, and they were in charge of every school in Bradford. Along with G4S, they are the largest contractor for services for vulnerable children. They run the infrastructure of the Child Protection Services. They run the UK ballistic missile system and our entire nuclear arsenal. They run 3 UK naval bases. Serco are contracted to administer many UK hospitals. The entire NHS blood bank is run by Serco. Does anybody starting to get an idea of how huge this multinational conglomerate company is? It is the octopus. It is the snake. It is the spider at the centre of the web.
Obscene.
Serco have contracted for our high defence Skynet, i.e. Terminator 2. Skynet satellite system. Serco run that. They also run and administer the US Patent Office. They issue every patent in the US. Serco have been involved in scandals in every one of these areas. They were fined £22 million. They run the ankle tagging for prisoners. So all the prisoners in the UK that have got that ankle tag on, that's Serco. £22 million fine for charging the government for dead prisoners. Who knows about that scandal with Nigel Farage? What do you think about Nigel Farage at the window? That scandal of those immigrants that have been picked up in the Channel and been put into hotels. Guess who's doing that? Serco. They run every single immigration centre. Guess what they also run? All of the high-speed rescue boats for the Border Force. Every single one of them is issued, serviced and ran by Serco. They are on commission to pick up every immigrant. They get £900 a pop to put them in their own immigration centres. And if they're full, guess where they go? In the 4-star hotels. Serco pick up the bill and they probably double it before they give it to the government and we have to pay for it.
Wow, we die.
Holy shit.
Yeah, £900 a pop for each asylum seeker. A very infamous asylum detention centre in Yarl's Wood is run by Serco, and it's infamous for sexual abuse and prostitution rings. They've lost lots of contracts for malpractice. In August, they got £108 million to run test and trace. And for the first few months, everyone was just sat around watching Netflix. They had contacted an average of 2 people each. £108 million we spent on that. So, who owns Serco? Serco is owned by CCL, the Crown Corporation Limited. Who owns the Crown Corporation Limited? The Crown Estate. Who owns the Crown Estate? The Crown. It's owned by the Crown. Corona means crown. Did anybody know that?
Yeah.
Corona is a crown virus. It's the virus of your highness. Okay. CCL and the Privy Council have the golden share in Serco, based in Hook in the southwest. There are 2 other companies I'm going to expose. They're all in the southwest too. Who's ever heard of Qinetiq with a Q?
Yeah.
Who's driven out past Verwent in that big sign?
Yeah.
Qinetiq are the cyber defence and military wing of Serco. They are also owned by the Crown. They are the same institute. Serco have an $8 billion US defence contract and Qinetiq have a $9 billion US defence contract. There is also another institution of this unholy trio. Who's heard of the Pirbright Institute? The Pirbright Institute in Surrey was responsible for foot and mouth. They also work at Porton Down. It was started by Lord Pirbright, Edward de Worm Rothschild. Linked with Cecil Rhodes and the Round Table and the Pilgrim Society. Does anybody know who those people are? Starting to paint a picture, guys, yeah? It's not just a private company. Pirbright Institute owns 200-acre site with Qinetiq with a satellite defence system and an underground base. Now, Pirbright have the patent to a coronavirus. Who knows how many patents for coronavirus? It's in between 60 and 70. For various different strains, there are 60 to 70 patents. Pirbright has the main patent on coronavirus. Guess who granted the patent? Any guesses? It was Serco, because they won the patent office. Painting a picture yet, guys? Lord Pirbright Rothschild, who started the Pirbright Institute, was a spiritual mentor of Cecil Rhodes, Alfred Milner, the Pilgrim Society, DERA, which is the Defence Evaluation and Research. This is the military-industrial complex. We're talking about the military-industrial complex. They're the progenitors of MI5, MI6 and GCHQ. It all came from the Pilgrim Society and this group of institutions. Right. They also funded eugenics. Does anybody know what eugenics is? It's racial selective science. Along with the Rockefeller Foundation, the Pirbright Institute and the Round Table Society are involved in funding Nazi experiments. After the Nuremberg trials, they continued to fund it. They also created the idea of concentration camps in the Boer War. So we have the theme of concentration camps, eugenics, vaccines and defence companies, all involved in this unholy trio of track and trace. Enter the Gates Foundation, our great friends Bill and Melinda Gates. Does anybody know how many shares they have in Serco and their particular avenue of private prisons? 200,000 shares, worth about $20 million. Pirbright, guess where? It's got a massive office and it works with the Viral Institute, Wuhan! Surprise, surprise. Now, although Serco is owned by the Crown and the Golden Share, does anybody know who the CEO of Serco is? Sir Rupert Soames. With his brother Sir Nicholas Soames, does anybody know who their grandfather is? Winston Churchill. 5 points for the man over there. Nicholas Soames, Rupert's brother, is best friends, literally best friends, famously with Mr. Prince Charles, Mr. Captain Reset. And, yeah, we all know. Famously, Nicholas Soames warned Princess Diana 6 months before her death to stop investigating landmines. Do you know why? Because he's the CEO of Aegis, one of the biggest military industrial contractors, which is also involved in landmines. Right, I'm now going to go down a bit of a further rabbit hole. Nicholas Soames is best friends with Prince Charles, so by default, guess who he's pictured with many times and also good friends with? Jimmy Savile. His brother Rupert Soames, the CEO of Serco. Guess whose flight log he's on with his wife Millie? Jeffrey Epstein is intrinsically linked with some of these military-industrial complexes through Lockheed Martin. Okay, so this little island of debauchery is actually linked intrinsically with the military-industrial program, with defence contractors. It gets so deep, even I was totally blown away by what I found over last weekend. So basically, the man that is the CEO of Serco, owned by the Crown, is going to administer a system that when you sign your permissions to the app, now, you know, when we have apps, everyone is so scared about the permissions for Snapchat. Oh my God, what's it going to do? What's this flashlight going to do? Can you imagine when you press I accept on the test and trace app that comes from Serco, the biggest military industrial contractor in the world? Can you imagine what the small print says in that app? I can tell you now that it is probably, it's not probably, I've seen the research, it's the biggest backdoor into your phone that you can imagine. That's one thing. You're also entering into a contract where you can get a notification at any time for any reason because you've been near to someone that allegedly had a test that's totally inaccurate for coronavirus, and you have to go home right now and you get a £1,000 fine. Who's going to be administering it? Serco, the people that administer the ankle tags for prisoners, the people that administer mobile prisons, nuclear defence, blood banks. Is this the kind of people that we want to be entering a contract into? And they're going to be able to say to us and dictate to us what we can and can't do. Does anybody want to enter into that contract?
No.
Has a single person here downloaded that track and trace app?
No.
Good. I've got some bad news for you. I've got lots of people that contact me from various different sources, different places. I was contacted last week by a young lad who has not downloaded the app. He showed me a screenshot of his Google settings. He's got COVID-19 turned off and he's still got a notification. It knew his name. And it said, you've been near an infected person, you have to isolate. And I informed him that's at risk of a £1,000 fine. He said he'd leave his phone at home. Has anyone researched the Chinese credit system? Yes. Has anybody researched what's happening in the Xinjiang province in Western China? They're using a social credit system linked in with a COVID-19 app that uses a QR code that is red, yellow or green. Maybe, no or yes, which dictates your entire life. That's now been integrated with the Chinese credit system, and in one province it's used to decide who goes to the internment camps, or the re-education camps as they're called. The BBC admits they have 1 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps that are put there digitally. Now, in Xinjiang, they're not allowed Facebook, so they don't have photos uploaded, and then it's not tagged. We do this willingly. We willingly give our facial recognition details to the beast. In Xinjiang, if you don't comply, they strap you down to a board and they forcibly scan you. And once you're scanned to the facial recognition, you don't even need the app, you don't need the QR code, it's your face, a digital patch. And when it's scanned, it says, trustworthy, untrustworthy, or maybe. And if you're untrustworthy, you've already got 1 foot in the internment camp. Is this surprising to anybody here, or did you guys already aware of quite how bad this is?
Some new news.
Because unfortunately, most of these poor bastards walking up and down here, some of them think we're completely insane. Yep. Some of them think we're just nutters that have watched one YouTube video and come to these crazy conclusions. Well, I urge everyone to listen in or to watch the whistleblower thing tonight. I'm looking to get whistleblowers on my channel. My channel is called Double LMC, that's my name, that's my artist name, and the show is called Rise Above. So, for everyone that's tuned in, thank you very much. For everyone that's sharing what I'm trying to put out, please do, because things are getting so close. The World Economic Forum has now said that the Great Reset happens in January 2021. Straight from the words of Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. It's talked about by Prince Charles, it's talked about by David Attenborough every day this week in the mainstream media. It's coming. Secure your assets, batten down your hatches, make networks of like-minded people, and prepare for the storm. Guys, thank you very much. Rise above.
So that's Lance Murdoch there speaking last Saturday in Bournemouth, Martin. I mean, I think there are certainly some errors there. But I mean, even if 1/4 of what he's saying there is true, it's pretty concerning about Serco effectively privatisation of the whole government and particularly military-industrial complex, both in here and the United States.
Well, it's interesting to hear what he had to say. I mean, I think possibly that a lot of it needs to be properly checked. I mean, he's made various pretty strong assertions there. and people need to make sure that they're just not, that they are genuine research that he's done.
I mean, some of those things he was talking about, we've covered on the show.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that these monstrous companies are a threat is quite clear. I mean, you don't need to be, that's obvious. Why, for example, should any private company be running prisons? I mean, it's normal practice in the US, and it's become normal practice here. But I mean, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that people should be making a private profit out of locking people up.
His big, I suppose, implication there is that this is effectively a kind of contract fraud. The idea of privatising these services. Should be being put out to tender, so Joe Bloggs and anybody can tender for stuff. But actually, these people have got an inside track, so they're getting it all. It's effectively a giant cartel.
Indeed. And of course, it's not just Serco. You've got G4S and various other companies as well. And you've got BlackRock in the US, which has basically taken over running the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, even though they're a private company for private profit. This is a process by which oligarchs all over the world are taking over the government to make it pliable to their needs. But of course, he talked there about what's going on in China, and yes, there are definitely issues in China about human rights and the system that they're setting up. But it's not a Serco system, is it? It's the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, maybe
system.
Serco are copying what the Chinese are doing.
Well, I mean, but everybody's doing the same stuff. Because ultimately what we're talking about here is World War III, and World War III will be organised on that kind of basis.
China
whoever's doing it.
A little bit similar to our 3-tier system where we're doing in our various regions. Anyway, 3 seems to be the main number that people like to use because apparently it's big enough for people to kind of understand. If you start getting 4, 5 and 6, people just kind of lose track of it. But 3, people can get their head around. Anyway, we're going to be hearing later from the Vox Pops in Cardiff last Sunday, the day after that recording was made by Lance Murdoch there. And we're going to be hearing also from an exclusive interview with Lance after we've had a good old look at the Great Reset, because I think the Great Reset, we need to hear from the people who are doing that. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, who seems to be in the process of taking over from the United Nations. They've had a partnership agreement last year where, many campaigners around the world are saying, well, actually, this puts the World Economic Forum in the driving seat at the United Nations now, because they just have the money to do it, whereas the UN is strapped for cash, so they're taking over the UN. It's a kind of hostile takeover bid.
The World Economic Forum in January 21 will serve as a global summit devoted to the Great Reset. This summit will bring the decision makers physically to Davos, but it will be interconnected with a virtual twin summit driven by the young generation, our global shapers. They will integrate over 400 hubs into the dialogue of Davos and ensure that the Global Reset Initiative is really forward-looking and takes into account the voices of all who are left behind.
Now, put aside for the moment that bloke looks like he's auditioning for the head of Smersh in the next James Bond movie. He is, in fact, Klaus Schwab, the founder and head of the World Economic Forum. He is a total whack job, in my opinion, and I'll get into that in a second. He's a big fan of drones, algorithms, and the Chinese Communist Party, and he believes there's a 4th industrial revolution underway that is changing what it means to be human. And he peddles this sicko fantasy that humans and machines will somehow merge in his green utopia. Bonkers, like I said, but this lunatic has some very, very powerful friends determined to push the Great Reset button.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Prince Charles insists all the levers at our disposal must be used to enforce the Great Reset. How on earth that one sentence alone does not disqualify Charles from ever succeeding to the throne is beyond me. He is now not only fully immersed in hardcore left-wing eco-politics, he is advocating some bizarre form of eco-fascism. The Queen must step in and insist he have nothing further to do with this freak show. After all, we are currently seeing in Victoria Just what it looks like when all the levers at our disposal are being used to enforce the COVID-19 restrictions, which include curfews, lockdowns, enforced mask wearing, shutting down of businesses, making you stay within 5 kilometres of your own home, not visiting the dying relos, and on and on. Remember, crony capitalism is anathema to genuine market economies, and giving more leverage to those who encourage it is fascistic, says Morris Newman. Schwab has written extensively about humanity being altered by machines, nanotechnology. He's a big fan of drones, artificial intelligence. Weirdly enough, Daniel Andrews recently ditched attempts to detain people on the suspicion that they might be about to disobey COVID regulations, has eerie echoes in Schwab's boasting how technologies can intrude into the hitherto private space of our minds, reading our thoughts and influencing our behaviour. And Schwab predicts, as capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. All of this, Schwab says, is redefining what it means to be human. Sounding like a demented character in a Batman comic, Schwab also writes gleefully that sensors, memory switches and circuits can be encoded in human gut bacteria, and that smart dust, arrays of full computers with antennas, can now organise themselves inside the body. Yep, this Marvel Comics whack job runs the world's most prestigious economic forum, and every year our corporate CEOs and business leaders go grovelling to him at Davos, and worse, our government wastes your money sending senior politicians and highly paid public servants to dance to this madman's tune. It's a disgrace. Oh, and did I mention he's a huge fan of China as the leader of his brave new world?
It was very appropriate to invite the president to join us, and he, as the leader of the country, to talk to us about the future's engagement of China in global affairs and the leadership role China will assume in determining and constructing our global future.
And why China? Well, apart from the drones and the surveillance, chat to the Uyghurs about that, they also pretend to care about climate change.
And China has already taken the lead. Just look in the negotiations in Paris on the environment.
COVID, China, climate change. The Great Reset is a toxic, poisonous, ugly offspring of fascism dressed up in the frilly frocks of environmentalism. It's a horror show. So what to do? Our Governor-General must insist to the Queen that Charles ceases all involvement with this travesty. The Morrison government must refuse to send any delegates to Lucerne in May, and any Australian businesses that participate in this grotesquerie deserve the full wrath of Australian consumers and shareholders.
Okay, so that's Rowan Dean on Sky News Australia. Martin, very, very prejudiced, biased piece, really, one-sided against this. I mean, don't you think actually that at some point something has to give here, that we're going to have some, replacement for the IMF? Because as you've been saying for the last 10, 12 years, that capitalism is going to crash. Now, at least it looks like the World Economic Forum, Schwab, Prince Charles, etc., have got a plan.
Well, what's going to happen is there are various plans to deal with what's coming next. And the capitalist class has got its own idea of how it's going to resolve the crisis. And that, Schwab is very well connected, to coordinate all of this. He's, he will know the people at the head of Serco, at the head of G4S. He will know the BlackRock people. He obviously knows Prince Charles. I think the assessment of the Chinese, because you've got a very right-wing Australian commentator there. As far as he's concerned, the Chinese are just part of this. I think that in actual fact there are contradictions between what the Chinese want to do and what the Western powers want to do. That doesn't mean that they haven't got overlapping interests. I mean, that's exactly what the Chinese would say is, look, why can't we work together?
Surely
but in actual fact, they're at daggers drawn.
Well, maybe.
So that doesn't really fit
I'm not so sure
it?
about that. I think there's quite a lot in the West that would like to have the same sort of authoritarian power, biometrics, that sort of thing, control over people's lives as they've got in China.
Yes, but of course the Chinese are doing it on their own bat because they've got their own agenda.
Okay, well, let's get Lance Murdoch's take on this and his channel Rise Above, LLMC, because we have an extended interview with him now, which is about 45 minutes long, where he really goes into why he's gotten into the why he believes that there's some serious stuff going on there, and also, I suppose, winding up by looking very, very closely at this World Economic Forum project. We just heard from the Australian guy there, but usually the Davos happens in January in Switzerland. But anyway, so here's Lance Murdoch and his take on COVID and where we're all heading.
My name's Lance Murdoch, aka LLMC. For the last 20 years, I've been an MC in various different capacities, mainly a rave MC at drum and bass things for like 15 years. I've done presenting work, some radio work. In the last 5 years, I've mainly been concerned with combat sports MCing, which has sort of eventually taken me all over the world. That's really taken off in the last 5 years. All over the world. I mean, for instance, in July, I did a 4-week stint out in Romania and Sweden with an outfit called Brave Combat Federation, which is actually owned by the Sheikh of Bahrain. So that was a very interesting experience. And I got to see what Sweden is actually like firsthand, because I spent 4 weeks in Stockholm throughout July, which is really, really eye-opening.
So what is this combat sport? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, all types of combat sports. Kickboxing. I have a professional boxing MC license. I've done some work on BT Sport. Whether I'll ever get booked to work on BT Sport again is another question after I've said some of the things that I've said recently. So yeah, Cage Warriors Northwest, lots of cage fighting events, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, all types of ring sports and cage sports. I am the guy that says ladies and gentlemen and gets everyone riled up before the guys.
So can you just tell us a bit about how you got into this, Lance?
Well, I've always been an MC. Always wanted to be an MC since I was 12 years old. After listening to a Wu-Tang album, Enter the Wu-Tang, one of the most seminal hip hop albums of all time, I decided I wanted to be a rapper at the age of 12. By the age of 18, I was on stage up in London at raves and stuff. And then for the last 20 years, mainly up and down the UK, I've been resident at the Full Moon Party in Thailand in Koh Phangan for the last 10 years. I do a lot of work out in Southeast Asia at various different parties and raves out there. But while this has all been going on with the music for 20 years, I've also been an absolutely avid researcher into the hidden story of what's really going on in the world, government cover-ups, false flag, terror attacks, who's really behind the power structure of the world. This all started for me in 9/11, so it was 19 years ago. So that's how long I've been looking into all this stuff. And basically, when I came back from Southeast Asia in January this year, I knew last year I'd been researching the UN and the World Economic Forum and the global reset, as everyone likes to laugh about it back then. Nobody's laughing now. Back in January, when I flew back through Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok, I already heard about coronavirus, and immediately I passed it off as what I thought was just going to be a bit of a red herring like SARS and MERS. They're bigging it up. It's not really going to be anything. But when I flew back, there's more Chinese tourists in Thailand, where I spend a lot of time, than all the other tourists put together. For instance, there's a lot of Chinese people there. And I watch all of the international news channels, a lot of the Asian news channels, especially the non-communist Chinese news. And as I flew back and I saw what was going on in the airport, and I got back here, I think it was the 15th of January, which I decided that this virus, whatever it was going to be, was going to be the event that tipped the global economy into the grand reset. And then lo and behold, I started saying this online, etc., etc. People laughed at me. The lockdown happened. My entire calendar for the year, I have 40 shows lined up all over the UK, both music and combat sports, MMA, boxing, big festivals. Now, obviously, that all got wiped. So I had a lot of time. And the thing is, I haven't really posted about this stuff for a couple of years because I didn't want to affect my career. I've been on BT Sport. I've been on ITV. I've been on some really mainstream news stations, and I stopped talking about this stuff, but then when the lockdown happened, after I was quiet for a couple of weeks, and then people online started asking me, like, what is going on? Like, what do you think? I said, listen, I'm not going to post anything until I've got a better idea of what I think is going on. And I'm going to be honest with you, back in February and March, because I've been researching the Chinese Communist Party and what they've been up to and some of the atrocities with the human organ harvesting and the internment or the re-education camps with the Uyghur Muslims. I've been researching that avidly for 2 years. I was instantly really scared that this was actually going to be even worse than they said, the worst type of chimera, sort of bioweapon virus. And I was at the supermarket with my gloves and my mask on when nobody else was, and everyone looked at me like a nutter. But then I started to look at the stats and, well, the rest is history. And then I started the Rise Above channel on YouTube. And after that speech I made last weekend, things have gone absolutely crazy. I've been completely bombarded with emails, messages, people asking for the transcript of what I said, asking for interviews. By the way, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
I think probably someone will probably want to get hold of your tablet as well, because most of the research seemed you were scrolling through it rapidly. I've never quite seen anybody deliver it so far.
To be honest, it was mostly bullet points. What happened? I'll tell you how this happened. Yeah. So I've already started my channel back in March, and I've been speaking about. I've started a series of shows called COVID 1984. For anyone that listening to this, you know why I've called it that. It's pretty obvious now. And each show I've covered a different aspect of it. First of all, the fake inflated deaths from PHE and the CDC. I try and mirror things in the US and the UK, so I've got a broader audience. Then I looked into ID 2020. Basically, 2 weeks ago, it must have been 2 weeks on the Friday, I saw a picture online of 9 different national newspapers, and each one of them, because I've studied media studies and advertising, there were no headlines at all, just a picture of the track and trace with a different colour on each newspaper in this neat 3x3 grid. And that was so symbolic. It really spoke out to me, because I heard something about track and trace. I knew who Serco were roughly from garbage disposal and stuff like that. But I saw that and something just lit up in my head. And I went on a 4-day, I reckon I spent 30 or 40 hours just rapidly. I had all these preconceptions about what I thought I was going to find. And the worst thing was every single one of them was true and 10 times worse. I sort of looked, I heard Serco and I wrote a list of what I thought I was going to find, and I found all of it, and it went a lot worse. So that was all of that on my tablet was all bullet points. I didn't get through most of them, and most of it was off the cuff because I don't like to read. I like to I like to flow a little bit more. But it was a pretty extensive investigation. I didn't get much sleep.
It was fascinating, and I think one of the things that you brought out, you teased out, was this link around the Commonwealth, which I think is still is, and we know about the 5 eyes, don't we? And the 6 eyes, if you include Israel, as quite a lot of people do. That there is still some very, very strong links between these different crown countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. And but the thing that I found so fascinating is you managed to pin a lot of this down to this thing called the Pirbright Institute. So who are these?
It appeared on my radar back in February. I'd heard of Pirbright because it's in my part of the world. Funny enough, the 3 companies, or not really companies, whatever they are, arms of this octopus that I've started to expose, they're all quite local to me. They're all in the southwest. Hook in Hampshire, Pirbright in Surrey, that Qinetiq. I drive past a huge Qinetiq like installation almost every day. They are heavily embedded around me, so I've always been aware of these companies, and I knew from my research from a couple of years ago that Pirbright was essentially, I'll say it, they were responsible for the foot and mouth outbreak. They were fined heavily for it as well. And if you look on the map where the foot and mouth outbreak were, like you can see, it's just a circle, and Pirbright Institute's right in the middle. So they were instantly on my radar when all this kicked off. And I realized that, it wasn't hard to find a link between the Wuhan Institute, the Gates Foundation, and Pirbright. They don't cover their tracks. There's a clear paper trail. It's very, very obvious.
People think about privatisation. I mean, obviously you mentioned in your talk DERA, the Defence Evaluation Research Establishment, which was privatised around 2000 and then became Qinetiq. These
it seems like in
organisations-
1999 there was a lot of things that happened financially, and a lot in 1999 was a very pivotal year for a lot of these corporations and being privatised. I've noticed that as a year that keeps coming up.
Yeah, but the point being that a lot of these institutes are supposed to have been sort of privatised, so kind of anybody can buy shares in them around the world. We were talking on our show last week about the number of public utilities, gas, electricity, water, that sort of thing, that have been bought up by big Chinese companies. But these seem to have been sort of transferred from government to crown. And I wonder if you think it's fair to say that.
Well, absolutely. This is the thing, right? Everyone was losing their rag because they thought that Serco was a private company, and they really only went that far as making that statement, oh, it's a private company, it's not the NHS. Well, if you really look at it, is it really a private company? Because like Qinetiq, Serco is owned by the CCS, which is the Crown Commercial Services. And above that is the Crown Estate. And as my research read, they still have what's called like the golden share. It's a thing that works through the Privy Council. But also, who else has 200,000 shares in Serco? It's Bill Gates, not the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their trust, worth, I think, $25 million, particularly in the private prison sector of Serco. And that seems like a really weird investment for such a kind philanthropist as Bill Gates.
Yeah, there's something a little bit fascistic about these private prisons, certainly, because, if you've got a crooked and corrupt judicial system, which it seems we're heading towards that way in the UK with the Assange trial and things like that, you can actually start stuffing your prisons with prisoners and make a private profit out of it, which is obviously a little bit dodgy. But look, can I just ask you, and take a step back from all of this, because I think for many of us, we want to know what's going on. Something is definitely not right about this. Anybody who perhaps back in April, May was saying, well, okay, this will be all right for a few months. They've now realised that it's not going to be for a few months, that we're not going back to normal until there's some enormous changes in society. And one of those changes seems to be that the government is going to be able to do, and as it already has been doing, things without real recourse to Parliament, or, they can change the laws really by clicking their fingers.
Yeah, I mean, like on my channel, I've exposed, I think it was the 28th of September it's before that, when they changed the laws about the rollout of any type of vaccine to do with COVID-19. They've basically removed liability from anyone advertising, producing, administering, or recommending any type of new treatment for COVID-19, which would include obviously vaccines. So, like, if you look at how many millions of pounds in this country, and I don't know how many it is in the US, has been paid out in vaccine damages over the years, that is like a sweeping bill. So that means that now, if you have brain damage, paralysed, etc., there's no comeback, there's no recourse. And
so if I was then to recommend a cocktail of strychnine and belladonna as a cure for COVID-19, I would be indemnified, would I?
Well, I read the document, and I couldn't see anywhere in it where it actually differentiated what you could and couldn't prescribe. It basically said it took away every piece of red tape and bureaucracy, every regulation, any level of testing, any level of anything. It sort of just opened the door that you can prescribe anything you want or recommend it with no recourse whatsoever.
So what's going on here, Lance? I think this is what people want to know.
Do you want me to tell you what I think at the highest level of what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, back in August of 2019, I've had people that follow the markets for me, and I heard about something called the Great Reset. I knew already that for over 10 years, our fiat monetary fractional reserve lending system, which is basically money, Kabbalistic money magic, it's fake, and it can't be, and it's been artificially inflated for at least 10 years, so it has to go. I use an analogy of a hot air balloon that's going down because it's got a tear in it, but they're pumping more hot air in it to make it go up, but it's making the tear bigger, so the balloon is getting bigger, but it's falling faster. So I knew the financial reset was happening, and I pretty much had been told that the smallest global event was enough to tip over the economy, because what they want to transition us to is something that's aligned with Agenda 2030, which I've been researching for a few years, and the sustainable goals, which in a nutshell, it used to be called Agenda 21, which was much more radical. But Agenda 2030 is something the UN has sort of tarted up a little bit and made it all about sustainable developments and equality. But it's essentially the end of free movement, the end of private property. They want everybody off the land into cyber cities. Obviously, I'm generalizing here. So this Great Reset, what it is, COVID-19 is essentially a red herring. There is another coronavirus in the mix. We've had coronaviruses around for decades. There've been many before, SARS, MERS, etc. But they're using it as an excuse, I believe, from my research, to shut down the world economy systematically, to use this as a cover story to transition us to a new economic model that is based around a single digital currency, which is digital, cashless, controlled by the IMF and WEF, essentially cutting out all middle and high level and obviously high street bank. That's all gone. In layman's terms, it's what people have been calling the New World Order, the one world government, for a long time. And I believe that's literally what they are trying to do as we speak, all around the world. At least in most countries that are going along with the WHO and the UN plan. Not all countries are playing ball. A lot of African nations are not playing ball. Belarus, the president of Belarus, didn't play ball with the WHO. He turned down a lot of money. What happened in 2 weeks? Huge uprising in his country. Is it the president of Burundi, 55 years old? He died 2 weeks after kicking the World Health Organization out of his country. These could be coincidences, of course they could. But people that turn down the offer of the WHO and the plan of lockdowns and restrictions, and they don't seem to fare very well on the world stage. I mean, Donald Trump being a famous rebel against their plan on the face of it anyway. The only guy that's sort of suggesting therapeutics like Regeneron, Remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine. That's a big one. When Trump first said about hydroxychloroquine, apparently Elon Musk, funnily enough, was actually the first guy to suggest it. I took that as a marker. I sort of had an idea that, this is only a coronavirus. We've had them before. I did a bit of research. Dr. Fauci actually wrote a whole paper about how hydroxychloroquine was one of the best ways to treat coronavirus and SARS. That's back in 2005. So that's a whole other line of inquiry, another thing that Fauci should be on trial for. But it's definitely not what it says it is on the tin. It's being used as a global shutdown. And I think a lot of people now, the Great Reset has been talked about left, right and centre. Prince Charles, David Attenborough, every day of the week, you can hear Prince Charles saying something about the global reset. So, this has been planned for sure.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that the idea is here that the massive bailouts that have happened, another $1 trillion or so, which has gone to the banks and the big companies to keep them going through all this. Very little of it has really trickled down to ordinary people. The actual effect has been really like a hammer blow on many small businesses, whereas big business and particularly big tech like Amazon and Facebook have basically doubled their value in the space of a couple of months.
I think what it is as well, I mean, to elaborate a little bit, it is definitely the bleeding dry of the middle class. And basically it's a move towards putting everyone onto UBI, onto universal basic income. I think that's really the plan. Because at the end of the day, we're also dealing with the onset of the fourth industrial revolution, where there's going to be a lot of automation. So a lot of people are in the next 10 to 20 years going to be out of the job. And I think what they're doing is they're pushing it forward quickly. And what's also happening is obviously the mass vaccination program from Gavi, who have been talking about their absolute, sort of religious belief that they have the right to vaccinate 7 billion people. And it seems to me very obvious that coronavirus is a pretty crappy candidate to use to vaccinate 7 billion people with the kill rate it's had. I highlighted in my speech last week about tuberculosis. The WHO says it's the world's most deadly infectious killer. 1.5 million people every year die of tuberculosis. There's no mass medication. There's no shutdowns. There's no masks. There's so many aspects of this that you can look at to see that nothing whatsoever makes sense. The fact that it's not even, COVID is not even designated a highly deadly infectious disease by our government anymore. That happened back in March. Yet we've still got 24/7 fear porn on the TV, systematic shutdowns of the country. I think we're going to go for a full national. I think they're going to try a full national shutdown. I really think that's what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, this week our Mayor of Bristol has publicly called for powers to lock the city down, even though central government doesn't want it to happen, because in the southwest the rates have been so low. One almost gets the idea that he's sitting in his office kind of itching to do a lockdown. So, we've got people in power. By the way, he hasn't been elected this year. He was supposed to be re-elected in May, but the election was cancelled. So really, he's got his dictator year where he's not had to actually be elected. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this can be quite scary. In fact, more scary than COVID is the political power, which is coming to a very few people without any checks and balances, almost like a kind of authoritarian rule. So have you got anything to say to listeners who are a bit nervous about that? I think because we kind of need a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, something to keep us going, Lance.
I think a bit of light at the end of the tunnel is that as things get crazier, more and more people are going to wake up. And the fact is that I truly believe this, that we actually have to consent to our own enslavement. At the end of the day, all of these small, little, ludicrous measures that we're asked to do, like businesses restricting how many people they can come in, this track and trace, et cetera, we have to have the power to say no. It's about acquiescence, and I've studied the more esoteric side of what these people at the very top believe, and whether everyone else believes in that stuff or not, they do, and they do believe in the power of free will. That's why they tell us what they're going to do, sometimes decades in advance. They write it down in graphic detail. That's why some people say, how can you think you've got the power to make these predictions? I'm not making any predictions. The fact is that, when these documents came out 5-10 years ago, I just read them back to front. And these people are very open about what they're going to do. But the only way that it's going to work is if we acquiesce towards it. And at the moment, unfortunately, still a good percentage of the population are still operating out of a level of fear. They're literally consuming everything that the BBC and Channel 4 and Sky News are telling them, which is 24 hours a day. Live in fear, be scared, stay at home, wear a mask, don't see your family. I mean, people think this is dangerous. I don't really care. I think people just need to ignore it. I think if you're vulnerable, yes, you can isolate from this new coronavirus that we've got in the mix of our seasonal flu. Because at the end of the day, it's getting lumped in with seasonal flu. They've changed the reports this week. Soon what they're going to do, it's very obvious, for years they're going to continue to just do it with flu season every year. And we'll have a 6-month lockdown until in 3 or 4 years' time we're on our knees. So what everybody needs to do is start speaking the truth, stepping up, refusing. And when people say, why are you refusing? You say, it's not because I'm ignorant. It's not because I'm selfish. It's because we're being lied to. And I'll tell you what, I think that there's a very high percentage of people that are still playing along with it, i.e. wearing their mask, walking around outside, not seeing their friends and family. I think they're doing it not because they really believe that it's as dangerous as they've been told. I think people can actually see through the lies, because the lies about what's happening are very, very obvious with just half an hour, 45 minutes of cursory research. But the problem is that most people don't have the urge to do that extra little bit of investigation past what they're being told from the TV. And that's a real problem.
Well, I think
that's why I'm being more vocal. That's why I'm trying to step it up and increase.
I think it's also because the fear works. So a lot of people are, they're basically hit. It's almost like an undercut. It's straight to people's subconscious. So they're telling you, look, if you don't do this, you're either going to get fined, you're going to get criminalised.
My granny's going to die. You're going to kill my family. When I was speaking in the street last week on the PA system, and none of us had masks, we were saying something about we're trying to avoid tyranny, etc. And someone screamed, "I don't want my whole family to drop dead." And I sort of, and I replied with, I don't want future generations to be digitally enslaved to a techno-fascistic, totalitarian AI system, or something. No, I didn't go quite that deep. But the thing is, when you're dealing with that level of fear response, I don't want my whole family to drop dead. It's almost like fear has been turned into a virtue. So between people that are, dying into it and, berating other people that are living their lives and breathing fresh air, they turned being fearful into a virtue. And that's a real problem. But like I said in this, I think everybody has an inroad. Everyone's got a little open door. Everyone's got a seed you can plant, and it's different for everybody. Maybe it's losing their job. Maybe it's seeing their elderly relative deteriorate because you can't visit them and thinking how ridiculous it is. It'd be better to see them than to see them wither away, you know. But unfortunately, I have a feeling it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. But I've seen what's happening in Liverpool, and it gives me some courage. I think I'm quite happy about what's happening in Liverpool at the moment.
Now, you were saying you looked into this ID 2020. What do you make of? Because that's something which popped up very early on. Bill Gates was talking about this.
Yeah, basically, I started looking into this last year when I was I've been on Bill Gates's tail for like 5 or 6 years. I never trust him. It's like Jimmy Savile. As soon as before I knew what a paedophile was, I knew he was a paedophile when I was a young kid. I just knew he was not right. I've had the same feeling about Bill Gates for as long as I can remember. So I started getting on in about 6 years, and I started researching the digital quantum dot tattoo that he was developing. And I looked at it and I was like, whoa. And this was back start of last year. And basically, I've looked into ID 2020 a lot, and not many people know that it's already happened in Africa. There are already 6,000 people, I believe it's in Ghana, that have a patch on their arm, which is like, it's like a transfer, but it has hundreds of hypodermic microneedles in it, and it puts nanodots ink into your arm as it administers a vaccine. So they might have vaccinated them for anything, I don't know, it could have been any excuse. But it's got a payment system in it from MasterCard. They can access government subsidies, energy tokens, etc. And they're already doing it. And ID 2020 is, the people behind it are Gavi, which is Gates, Microsoft, which is Gates, the Rockefeller Foundation, which we all know who that is, MasterCard, and a whole host of other subsidiary companies, most of which are also Gates or Rockefeller. It's also intrinsically linked with Agenda 2030 and what's called data-enabled vaccines, which is one of the absolute key things in the health section, the sustainable health section of Agenda 2030. They want everyone to have data-enabled vaccines. So I was like, what the hell is a data-enabled vaccine? So basically, a data-enabled vaccine is something that, you know, people talk about a microchip, like the size of a grain of rice. That was old technology in the 90s. Now we're talking about literally nanotechnology. That's not science fiction. They have nanotechnology, and they can put it in this infrared ink, and it has your vaccine record in it, and it, you know, you can access MasterCard payment system with it. So it's got technology in it that could do anything a microchip can do, but it's of a nano size. Now, whether we're going to start seeing this patch used, the funny thing is, this patch was actually developed for children. So children that are scared of a needle would have this transfer, and they could put a picture of a superhero on it or something. But these 400 hypodermic microneedles obviously have far different abilities to a regular hypodermic needle. So, ID 2020 wants to give 1 billion people digital ID, which currently have no ID. So everyone in the third world, it looks, will be the guinea pig for this, as is already happening in Africa. But basically, by 2030, by their own words, everybody would have to have this digital ID. Now, the funny thing is, when I looked into this, there was a parallel between Serco, because the companies that were involved in producing the trust stamp, this hash system that scans your face from a single photo and gives you an individual hash, they were also heavily involved in the penal system and control of inmates in the private prison system in the US. So when you talk about track and trace, ID 2020, digital immunity passports, when you look and you follow the money, what you're going to find 10 times out of 10 is the companies that are administering the technology and the infrastructure are involved in private prison systems and basically the penal system, as is Serco. So,
I mean, that's fascinating, because we're also seeing, aren't we, right across the world, the discrediting of elected governments. So the idea really is that people are believing less and less in the point of voting, because they can see that the governments aren't really performing. And so in the end of the day, you've got these corporations, these mega companies, these transnational companies waiting in the wings to really take over their role.
Yeah, it's like they've always been there, and they've always really been in control. It's like like I exposed in I didn't really go into it in the speech. In my presentation on my YouTube channel, I really go into the detail about what Serco controls. And it's no exaggeration to say that, like, I mean, out of Commonwealth countries, it must run at least 50% of the military installations and hardware and technology and, the immigration service, the prison. It's absolutely mind-boggling. If you talk about like the umbrella corporation from Resident Evil, Serco is a very, very, very good candidate for a real-life version of the umbrella corporation.
Well, okay, we've talked about the policy, the crystal ball gazing, which we might call intelligent guesswork, maybe. But what about the spiritual? What about the spiritual side of this? Because obviously, the one thing that really can keep people going is a belief in something better, in the human spirit, God, or whatever.
I will say this, without going too deep into my own personal spiritual beliefs. I believe that the reason, it seems to me that this is being rushed, and it also seems to me that it's not going to plan. In Event 201, Bill Gates predicted, and all of the simulations, Event 201 is one of 5 simulations that's happened in the last 15 years involving a respiratory pandemic, right? And they always envisaged in their plans that in the first 7 months, it will take out 20, at least. That was in KDEX. In Event 201, Bill Gates predicted 66 million people. A number that keeps coming up, along with 33, funnily enough. So it seems to me that whatever plan they had, because these people are depopulationists, they definitely wanted to, they need to cull the population to get us all into the cyber cities for Agenda 2030. There's no way there's room for 7 billion people. So I think that something has gone wrong. And I think that there is also another group of global elites that aren't quite on board with murdering loads of people. Because at the end of the day, in this Agenda 2030, there's probably no room for this whole class of millionaires and billionaires. If you're not on board with the highest level of the technocratic fascistic dictatorship, you're probably just going to be lined up against the wall like everybody else. So I do see a kickback. I do think things are happening behind the scenes. I do think that there is a split, the first time ever, in what seemed to be sort of like a monotheistic cult that was behind what's going on, because there is a big spiritual aspect. There's a reason that certain numbers keep popping up in what we're seeing. The rule of 6 is not just the rule of 6. There's 6 people, 6 feet, 2 meters apart for 6 months. That's the rule of 666. 33 is a number that keeps coming up a lot at 66 as well. And this got asked of me in the speech why. And I said, whether people want to believe it or not, at the highest levels of the WEF and the UN and the WHO, these people are occultists. Whatever you believe about occultism, these are dark occultists, and they do believe in things like natural law and the power of numbers and symbols, colours, frequencies, special dates. And I feel like this is being rushed through because I feel like they're trying to clamp us down, because at the end of the day, if everyone takes in 7 billion people an RNA gene editing vaccine and you have a digital pack, that's a Bible prophecy, and I don't care what anybody says. And I'm not a Christian. I study many different world religions. I don't necessarily follow any of them, but there's definitely a lot more going on than just a pandemic, than just a political overthrow, than just a global financial reset. There's also huge astrological alignments and lunar cycles that are linked into this as well. For instance, not many people know that this month is there's a blue moon this month. It's very rare. It's roughly every 36 to 40 years. The first moon was on, I believe it was on October the 1st, when Boris announced the rule of 666. And the actual blue moon is on the 31st of October, which is also Halloween, All Hallows Eve. And I have a feeling, and I'll make a prediction. I don't care if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling we may go into a full lockdown by the 31st of October. But I feel like these people are rushing, and the more it gets crazy, and the more obvious that they're fudging the figures by mixing it with the flu, the more reports of empty hospitals, the more whistleblowers from the NHS, the more doctors speaking out, people are going to realise what's happening. I really don't think people will accept this vaccine. Some people will, unfortunately, but I don't think everybody else will.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The way they've managed to kind of keep this going through the summer without any real increase in the numbers of people dying of anything, really.
Yeah, I think that's what the masks were for.
Bringing it through to the next flu season. So all of a sudden, once we're in December, it's going to be flu season again.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's seen. It was just last week where Public Health England announced that as of this week onwards, the 8th of October onwards, or last week, they're officially mixing the flu reporting with COVID-19, and they have a new category called ARI, acute respiratory infection. So we have to be really careful now, because when we start to report numbers, are they going to say it's COVID? Because they've stopped saying that. They've already said corona cases, which is very sly, because as we know, coronavirus is rhinovirus, is cold. Yeah. But now what we need to see is if they're actually reporting this new ARI, because ARI contains corona, COVID, flu, and allegedly a lot of pneumonia cases would also be in there as well, because people that die of flu or pneumonia, it's very interchangeable. So, like, you know, the thing is, you can look at their own stats. I usually always quote ONS, Office of National Statistics, because they seem to be the best. You know, PHE change their stats every week because they get caught lying or getting it wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, they can continue doing what they're doing, exposing themselves, blatantly lying and mismanaging. And more people are going to wake up, and hopefully, you know, we go down the road of Germany where we have millions of people protesting, refusing to wear masks. And I hope Liverpool set an example to the rest of the country, to be honest.
I picked up what I think are a couple of smoking guns. One is the shutdown in France in mid-January of chloroquine as a potential cure. The French government actually saying, I think it was the 15th or 16th of January, taking it off the list of medicines that you could just get over the counter. You couldn't from that date. And then also the stocks in the country all supposedly disappeared. This is the one thing that could have saved tens of thousands of lives, potentially.
There's
anyway.
A lot of blood on somebody's hand regarding hydroxychloroquine. A lot. You know, I think it was actually that French professor Didier Raoult, who was the first one. He's a bit of an eccentric character, which probably didn't help. But he was the first one to actually write the whole report on hydroxychloroquine. But the thing is, people only need to go back to look at Dr. Fauci's own report from 2005 to say that it was the best therapeutic for SARS. Which essentially
it's interesting. So they knew this. I mean, this is really almost like evidence of a malice of forethought. Yeah? So the other thing is the enormous amount of. I mean, we were reporting on it when we were on FM in Bristol back last year, sort of September time, of bringing in legislation to mandate vaccines. Now that happened in Italy and in Germany and in China last autumn. So, you know, you do wonder, don't you, whether this has been in the pipeline for some time.
They also had the trial run of the first level of mass vaccination, and guess where in China? 3 guesses. Wuhan. It's kind of crazy, right? Because like the whole bat soup and the wet market thing is so rubbish, man. Because by their own admissions, that bat comes from a cave in Yangon, which is quite far away, and by the own wet market admissions, they don't sell that bat at the wet market. Someone's saying it also could have come from a pangolin. It's like, but there's also a level 4 viral containment lab 20 kilometers away, accepted $3.5 million through Dr. Fauci to move their coronavirus vaccine research, which involved bats, which is all heavily documented by their own admissions. That's not the leaked stuff. That's the official documents of their research into basically using this bat coronavirus. And I can never pronounce the word. It starts with an A and it's got T's in it. It's a word that they do something to the virus to basically make it more viral, so they can test the vaccines on it, and they can have the test cycles be shorter because the vaccine produces quicker. So by their own admissions, $3.5 million was invested in that very research to produce these hybrid chimera coronaviruses taken from a bat from the cave in Yangon, and to create vaccines on them for existing coronaviruses. So it's a pretty rubbish cover story as to why you would be creating the vaccine for a coronavirus that hasn't been bad since SARS and MERS wasn't exactly a huge global problem.
What do we expect with this great reset? I mean, they've got Davos in January. We've also had this agreement signed last September, I think it was, between the UN and the World Economic Forum, effectively for a partnership agreement. So that, you've got the World Economic Forum, which has been kind of meeting up in this snowy alpine setting for at least a couple of decades in a January, which is, of course, when nobody can go and protest like we all used to go down to the Euro top summits, the G8 summits and protest. You can't do that at Davos, and you'll freeze to death. But anyway, what do you think's going to come out of that?
Well,
what can we expect?
Here's the thing, for a long time, everybody had their eyes on the Bilderberg Group, and by all intents and purposes, the Bilderberg Group was, the think tank behind the all world governments and the highest level elites. For me, what the Great Reset means is they call it stakeholder capitalism. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that's supposed to mean, but to me, it sounds like it means it's capitalism which is owned by huge stakeholders. Average people in normal capitalism that can have a business, they don't sound like stakeholders to me. So it's also linked in hugely with the Green New Deal. And it was always the way that these world elites were going to do one of two things. A nuclear war in the Middle East through the Zionists, or saving the environment from us and, Agenda 2030. It looks like they've gone for the latter.
Or both.
Well, both, yeah. But, thermonuclear war hasn't happened. I think the idea is that something has to happen, some terrible global event, before we will be herded into the cyber cities and we have no private property and we live like, all the dystopian sci-fi futuristic films that we've seen, all those mixed together and worse, because, I've read all the papers and I've read the articles the article of A Day in the Life in Agenda 2030. I own nothing. The house I live in doesn't belong to me. Someone else is in another room using this room to do that. In the house that you live in, someone has just walked in and started using a room to do something because you don't own anything. Travel's restricted. We don't ever leave the cyber city. 95% of the Earth's surface is left for rewilding. So it's basically, we're talking about a whole global digital cyber city gulag where, they're painting it as some sort of, full scale luxury communism, where you have everything you need, but you don't have to work, you don't have to pay for anything. But the scary thing is, and again, this is something I exposed quite early on this year, I think in February. Bill Gates has a patent with the numbers 2020 and 666, and you can Google this. It's true. And when you Google this patent, the patent is for a device which is an interface between a human body, which mines cryptocurrency based on the electromagnetic reactions from the human it's attached to. So what this means is, once you've lost your job because of the fourth industrial revolution and you're sat there at home with nothing to do, you can wear this patch and you can essentially sit there for hours consuming media, watching adverts, and based on your reaction from adverts, you can mine cryptocurrency with this device that's linked to a blockchain owned by Microsoft. So as soon as I saw that, I said, well, that's what everyone's going to do afterwards. When no one has a job anymore because everything's automated, so they say this is what it's going to be. Obviously, these are their predictions. You'll be able to sit there just on your ass, basically watching vacuous adverts and commercials all day. And it'll be, the same as they farm our information from Google and smartphones on our reactions of social media. But this is talking about an actual a physical biometric implant that mines cryptocurrency. And I thought, Jesus Christ, you literally couldn't, I said it in my video, a sci-fi writer would get an erection over something like that. That's so farcical. I couldn't believe it was true. But lo and behold, Bill Gates had the patent.
I suppose, the way money operates is, you can use it as a lure for people to pretty much do anything. I mean, people don't really seem to use morality as a value very much anymore. Most of what they're thinking about when they're making decisions about their life is to do with, is this going to actually bring me some cash in so I can survive or not? So that what you're suggesting there is that, you can say to people, well, you can make a bit of money by sitting and watching adverts.
Well, you say money, but what it will be tokens that will more likely only be redeemable through the network from which you've harvested
of some sort.
Yeah, credits. So it's like,
This is the ancient Egyptian form of currency. This is what the ancient Egyptians had. You didn't have any money as an Egyptian citizen. You had a credit with the Egyptian authorities, basically. So we're going back to that sort of system.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, basically, we're also going to an exact, almost textbook episode of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror, where everyone is in this futuristic world, and I think they're on exercise bikes all day, watching TV to earn their credits, wearing Lycra.
Okay, Lance.
I don't think there'll be any Lycra in Agenda 2030. I don't know.
All right. So, and it's also interesting, isn't it, that we had Agenda 21 and we're just about to move into 21, and then 30 takes over. There seems to be quite a lot of kind of coded language in all of this. Look, have you got anything to sort of say to cheer us up to think that humanity might actually make it through this without being enslaved?
I think that at the end of the day, right, the yin and the yang has a white and a black for a reason. It can't go all the way black. The pendulum has to swing all the way back. The universe won't allow it. I think the very reason that we're having this conversation and the people are thinking this all around the world is that enough people know what's going on. And I think what's going to happen in the future, if I was going to look to the brighter side, is I think that unfortunately, I think certain countries are going to go for this, and what's going to happen is that other countries are going to break away. Maybe in the future we might have some sort of soft-core Mad Max sort of techno scramble. I've looked at the Rockefeller plan, and they have a four-way axis. The axis that they're going forward on is called Operation Lockstep. Top-down, technocratic, digital control, quarantine, etc., etc. But there's four other options. One of them is called Smart Scramble, and one of them is called Hack Attack. And they involve total decentralization of power, people using different cryptos, different forms of trade to interact, people scrambling for different technologies to solve problems. There's some conflict in there as well, but I think we're going to go back to basics. I don't think they're going to win. People, even the most asleep people that are totally alien to any of this exterior knowledge, it's going to come to them and it's going to hit them in the face. So I have a saying. At some stage, everyone has to take the red pill. It's your choice. It's much better to willingly take it with a glass of water so it goes down nicely. If you leave it too late, you will always have to take it. But if it gets administered against your will, it's not going to be so much fun. So yeah, I'd say please everyone check out my channel. I try to what I try to do on my channel is present the information in a way that you could give it to someone that has never heard of this alternative way of looking at things before, what's going on. But it's also going to give a bit of an insight to people that have already been looking into this as well. So I start easy, and then I tend to take it a little bit deep, and I'm just doing my best to wake people up. I don't know what I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't, to be honest.
Now, one thing I'll just add to that is a bit of a sort of caveat and a warning is that one thing for sure about the global elite, the people, the oligarchy really you could call them, is that they like to control both sides of the chessboard. So they're very good at creating movements that seem to be, against the establishment, but actually,
absolutely.
So just be very careful, folks, in any sort of movement that you're part of. Be absolutely confident that it's not one of these kind of controlled oppositions. So anyway, Lance, thanks ever so much. Double LMC. We're going to finish
Double
with
LMC
your
on YouTube.
tunes. Sorry?
I was about to say on YouTube, I'm the word double L and MC. And the show's called Rise Above. I also make music. There's music videos on there, and I do not talk about anything apart from these subjects, as I have done since 2016. A lot of the music on there is from 2016 when I started talking about this.
So when did you write the song "Don't Believe Me"?
I actually wrote that 10 years ago. I recorded it last year, and I made the video in lockdown in a disused naval base. I broke into it.
Well, we're going to hear it now. Do you want to just tell us what's the inspiration behind it before we hear it?
Basically, it covers all aspects of a different hidden history of the world, and it's basically, if you don't believe me, go and study history. Check the activity of bloodline dynasties. It's all about history. It's all about the occult forces that are controlling us. It's quite a fun tune as well. It's not too serious or dark, so it's enough for anyone. Yeah, check me out on YouTube, Double LMC, Rise Above. Yeah.
Lance Murdoch, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Go study history. Go study history. Politicians, professors and scientists, controlled by some rioters. Through 2 world wars they've been trying it. Corporate investment, no matter who the finalists. Don't believe me? Go study history. Check the activity of bloodline dynasty. Sumer, Egypt and Rome. Consistently pan-European imperial misery. World conflicts enact social change, so they want it. But we must abstain, acquiesce and you're in for a world of pain. A workhouse where you dream of a minimum wage. That's the plan, but it's closer than you think. We'd be there now if it wasn't for the cosmic shift. They're panicking, the game is up. It's all illusion, the only truth is love. Don't believe me? Don't believe me? This goes deep cause they rewrote the history books. You can't quote how the real history looks. Empires thrive from the lands they took. We're in the same boat, it's kept afloat by crooks. Been the same way for more than 1,000 years. There's no love here, all you're allowed is fear. Break through the clouds so the sky is clear. Satanic whispers hidden in the sounds of prayers. Dark suits, cold hearts, no empathy. Fill positions of power in our embassy. Stone circles and burning effigies. Chanting mantras to bring forth energies. Secret meetings that map out our destinies. Hooded figures, manifest entities. Pollute our minds so we got no memory. For centuries helplessly trapped by the treachery. Don't believe me? Obelisks and illuminated torches. Landmarks of malevolent forces. Sorcerers aim to contain your mind state. Open your eyes where you're already blind, mate. You want the truth, better ask and why. Your worldview got squeezed through a needle's eye, and here's the proof. They extinguish lives. Conflicts built on evil lies, no surprise. We don't know of no agenda. Disguised from the light from the moment you enter. Survival of flight, you're a lifelong member. That's right, since they sliced the placenta. Now, welcome to the slave race. Very few will ever find out how the game's played. Unless you wake up, keep on playing it. They look at me and think, why is he saying it? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Go study. Don't believe me? Go study history. Go study history.
Well, that's MC-double-L, aka Lance Murdoch, Martin. Interesting little tune. Still playing out nice. I mean, you know, certainly he's saying here that in a way he's sort of doing what we were doing there, comparing Donald Trump to the Roman Empire. You know, he's saying that actually there's quite a lot of control of history. I mean, George Orwell said something very, very similar, didn't he? About, you know, that he who controls the past controls the present, who controls the present controls the future. There's widespread distrust of authority. And of corporations and the governments that they control. I mean, he's talking about his Bournemouth talk he did. We heard there about Serco. He finishes off really by pointing people towards this whole thing of the Great Reset. Now, I suppose it would be obvious for the banksters, the global elite, to engineer, if they're going to engineer a crisis, rather like something that happened in 1929, the financial crash of Wall Street. I mean, is it possible to engineer something like that, or these things just happen and run out of control? Well, they would happen and run out of control anyway, because that's the nature of the beast. I mean, capitalism is a scramble for profit, and therefore it's not a very, it's basically an anarchic setup. But of course, there is also manipulation. And, if we look at what's happened going, the strategy of tension in Western Europe in the 70s and the 80s, leading up to 9/11, which then allowed, of course, the dot-com bubble had burst at that point. And what should have happened is that capitalism should have reset at that point. But they stopped it because they said, because of 9/11, we've got to pump loads of money into the financial services sector to prop it up. And then, of course, every time the financial services sector has crashed, they've come back in with even more stuff. I mean, what do you make of to prop it up? 1929, though, the Wall Street crash. Yeah. There are all sorts of different theories about that. Some saying that it was just happened, and but there was others who were saying actually there was a knowledge amongst the financial elite that the stock market was due to topple, and so they decided that they wanted to topple it at the time that was most convenient for them and make as much money as possible.
Well, interestingly enough, I was reading about this morning. People were Trump and various of his colleagues were briefing Wall Street that the pandemic was going to be much worse than they were saying. In public, they were saying, we're not too worried about this, we think we've got it under control. In private, they were saying to their Wall Street chums, it's time to short the market. So
does that mean they're helping them make money out of the crash?
Basically, yes.
It's insider trading.
It's insider trading, that's right, yeah. And it's so normal that it's actually, it's what goes on.
Well, that's supposed to be a crime, but of course, now apparently if you're a government agency, it's not a crime anymore.
Exactly. I mean, this is the way things have always run.
He's really showing there that he's, I think, got a real depth of understanding of essentially what he's talking about is a kind of system which is all ready to go, which is going to enslave humanity if we're not careful.
Well, I'm definitely of the opinion that there is an attempt to enslave humanity, and it's great that people are questioning what's going on. But, the answers are still complicated and messy.
So, thanks very much again to Lance. But we're going to go now to look at my appearance over in Cardiff last Sunday, which was one of the stand-up protests. And I was absolutely gobsmacked to see so many people there, something like 300-400 people as I came around the corner next to the Welsh Parliament. And I gave my little talk, which you can find online somewhere, no doubt. Maybe I should stick a link up to it on our show page at thisweek.org.uk, which was mercifully short, about 15 minutes or something. But I did actually, while I was there, spend quite a bit of time going around the crowd, talking to some of the punters that had turned up from all over, mostly from South Wales, about why they were there.
My name's Alistair. So, yeah, my take on it is I think that potentially they've rebranded the flu, to be brutally honest. Look at the flu cases for 2020 so far. I think they were 347 cases reported from the Office of National Statistics in the data this year. There's normally around 10,000 cases a year, so where have those gone? It's a completely disproportionate response, and it's obviously clearly part of something far bigger as a tool of control. And I think economically as well, there seems to be an agenda to transform the economy on the back of it. Some people talk about the Great Reset being the main reason for doing all of this, really. So something to maybe look into is something called the Great Reset. Some people say that the ultimate agenda is to have a one world government and complete police state dictatorship and a cashless society. So a lot of that has been constructed under the guise of climate change as well. So they're kind of both aligning. The pandemic is aligning with the climate change agenda as well.
Chaz, it's just what massive scam, massive agenda. We're just under attack. It's just tyranny. It's a police state, and it's just getting worse. It's just going to get worse unless we stand up to them.
Was safe and effective. I have one word for you: thalidomide. For those of you who don't remember thalidomide, it was a...
Hiya, I'm Meg. So I've come here today because I don't agree with what's occurring at the moment. I think in Wales we're under draconian law, and I feel as if, for example, I'm a student, and at the moment in halls there's police patrolling every night in hazmat and full PPE, and they're scaring all of the young students who have just joined university into submission. They're not allowed to have parties or even social gatherings within the same building, and they're even going into people's flats and putting social distance stickers on the floor of people's flats within the same household. 2 doors down from me, police were called on some friends. The police were called, and 4 occupants of this household, once everyone from the party had left. There are 10 people in total just having an evening in together, and the police were called, and the occupants are fined £200 each. We have to wear masks now in the shops, and I feel for those who are exempt. They are scared to leave the house because They are constantly challenged about wearing masks. They're told to put them on. They're forced into doing it. And first of all, you can't leave the house without wearing a mask to go to the shops. What's the next stage? Is it going to be vaccines? You can't leave the house unless you've got a vaccine. It's one step to another, and it keeps getting more and more intense.
But what about the virus?
The virus itself, well, when you look at the cases in comparison to deaths, the thing is, it's got a 92% survival rate, and the only people who are dying, the main age group, is 80 plus. It's not a case of the average everyday person. Actually, Chris Whitty, in the beginning of lockdown, he was giving a press conference, and he said that a very small minority would die of this virus. He said most people would get the virus and get over it. The small majority of that being the 80 plus age group and those who have pre-existing health conditions.
How are students generally reacting to all this?
The majority of them want to comply just to have an easy life, especially with things like TikTok and Instagram being very left-wing, very on board with the mask, making masks cute, making them fashionable, making them part of accessories, and making this whole situation like a bit of a fun, bit of a joke. Like, that's fine, but I feel they are our future. We've got to make them realise that what they're subscribing to is completely draconian. Having someone tell you what you're going to wear on your body, and then potentially next having someone tell you what you have to put in your body, because it's happening. They're working on a vaccine, and Matt Hancock wants to roll it out.
Your sign you've got here, singing, dancing, band. Are we ruled by the Taliban?
It's actually a sign.
That rhymes. Well done.
It's actually a sign that my friend made, so I can't make the credit for it, but she needs, obviously, people to hold them up. But I do agree with this statement. I mean, this is the thing, this is, I think, highlights the most important thing. We are quite jolly people. We're British. We're ultimately, unapologetically, humorous, fun-loving people. We've got satirical sense of humour, and we love a good sing-song. We love a dance. We love going to gigs. We love going to pubs. We love socialising. We're social people. Especially in Wales, everyone loves a chat, singing, dancing. That's what I used to do in school. Now the kids can't do it because their germ patterns will be in sync, This is what is happening in primary schools. They're not allowed to sing and dance. And I remember I used to sing hymns in primary school. I used to be in the school choir. And those things are so good for children, music and dance and just being close. What happens if a child falls over in a playground? I used to want a hug if that happened to me. Now,
Where's it ultimately going, do you think?
I believe it's taking us into the next stage of existence in modern society. I think what's occurring at the moment is a front for, I don't want to say the New World Order, because I feel like it brings in all of these satanic Illuminati connotations, which is a whole different kettle of fish. But specifically with this virus, if you think about it, everyone uses their phones. Everybody is completely online now. I'm doing my university course completely online, and my course is completely practical, which makes absolutely no sense. I'm a chiropractic student, so this is very difficult because we can't do practicals, and it's actually physically hands on another body, so it doesn't happen anymore. We have one in-person lecture, but it's a lecture. We're sitting in a lecture hall, all 2 meters apart, and there's only 20 of us per group, and everyone's on their phones, because we have to do the sessions on our phones, and everyone's paying on their phones, paying on their mobile phones and their credit cards. We're not having that contact anymore. We're going into a cashless, personless. I do believe that technology serves us for a good purpose, and it is wonderful, but at the end of the day, we don't need to be separated. We're creatures of community, and in a tribal setting, humans have always been creatures of community, and now we are isolated. There are 18-year-old students that this is their first year of university, and they're in a room on their own, and they're not allowed to mix with other people. They're not allowed to see their friends. They aren't allowed to have that sense of community that you need so desperately.
Susan, do you find there are some young people that want to catch it?
I would happily catch it. I've had the flu twice. I'd happily add another one to my collection. Why not,
They know how we tick.
Well, this lockdown is a complete and utter hoax. I'd like to say that the RT-PCR test, that was created by Kerry Mullis in the 1980s, and he won the Nobel Prize in 93 in chemistry for his discovery, but he put a caveat on the RT-PCR test, not to be used for diagnosing contagious diseases, which is exactly what the state are using to diagnose COVID-19.
So how is that affecting the figures that are coming out and the news coverage?
The RT-PCR test collects your DNA, your cells, your bacteria. It's then sent off to a laboratory to be magnified. Now, you need perhaps 10 cycles to get the magnification of a positive, but NHS and so forth are going way beyond that. They're going up to 40, 45 cycles. With that, you will find everything that you would ever want to look for in the RT-PCR test. And they're not looking for COVID-19, they're looking for a genetic sequence based on your RNA. They're looking at 9 primers, and if they can find a match, which is just below 80%, then you are deemed to be positive. Just below 80%. Now, bear in mind that we are 97% match with chimpanzees, but I don't think we're monkeys, are we?
You're suggesting these tests are a colossal fraud?
Absolutely, 100%. And you need to go further and look into the false positives. If I said to you that the government's false positive rate was 2.3%, which is a medium over various data that they've collected, 2.3% false positives. 100 people tested, you would think in your mind, and mine until I saw the algorithm being used, that 2.3 people out of 100 would be falsely tested positive. But that's not what they do. Let me give you some numbers. If they're using 10,000 people as an example, then 1 in 500 people are testing positive for the COVID virus test. That means 20 people from 10,000 prove positive. But they build in their false positive of 2.3%. Now, 2.3% of 10,000 is 230. Added to the 20 that were positive, you now have 250 cases, but only 20 that were tested positive. And the chances of dying from being diagnosed as positive, if you're over 70, is 0.26%. And dying under the age of 70, 0.04%. So we are being scammed with the figures big time.
You seem to have a lot of detailed knowledge about this. Are you a professional interest in it, or have you just been swatting up?
Just a lay person that's kept his ear to the ground. That's all.
My name's Reese, and, well, I just think at the end of the day I speak for a mass majority of people out there who I personally speak to in my business, work colleagues, friends, family, and the thing is, it's just the numbers just do not stack up with this. Whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not, it's irrelevant because the numbers don't stack up. There's 98% of us on this planet, and this thing is only affecting a very small percentage of us, yet our government is shutting down the economy, risking jobs, risking people's mental health, making people destitute, you name it, cancer treatments, the list goes on, you know, child abuse, you know, domestic abuse, the whole thing throughout these lockdowns are affecting people massively for a very small percentage of people, and we just got to get on with it now, in my view. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing on the media and everything, you know. I got my own business, it's affecting my business, it's affecting my livelihood. I'm not the only one on my own with this. I know other business owners, I know millions and millions of other people out there who are going to be losing their jobs, becoming destitute, and people are just starting to question this now.
So how has it affected you then in your livelihood?
Well, my actual livelihood, I like to say, I got my own business. For 16 weeks when we had the lockdown, I had very little income support off the government, and because of these localised lockdowns, my customers cannot come into my business because I have a big catchment area for my customer base. So it's affecting me. The thing is, my priority is to make sure I keep jobs safe and I keep my staff safe.
Have you been doing stuff online? Because that's what they're suggesting, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, I'm a hairdresser, so my thing is limited to personal contact. So all you can do is be safe, make the measures, be safe. I get that, and we've done that. But yet they're trying to screw us even more. They're trying to stop us from doing our job. And
so where do you think this is all heading?
I don't know. I think that's the thing that I'm most frightened of, really. I think, you know, once again, now we've just seen it up in Scotland and the north of England. They're shutting pubs down. The hospitality sector's getting smashed to bits now. It's just frightening. That's the thing. I don't know where it is going, but it needs to stop. It needs to stop.
The lockdowns that are put in place at the moment are all based on a test that doesn't work. 93% inaccuracies. They've actually said that on the news. How can they make rules on something that doesn't work? It's affected my business. I've had to close my shop down. I do massage. People are afraid to come for a massage now, so it's massively affected me.
Have you had help from the government at all?
Yeah, we've had some help, but that's just bribery to me to keep quiet, like, you know. And people just don't realise what's about to come with the economy. I think it's all part of the Great Reset, mate. The economy was going down the pan before this disease, and they just conveniently got this disease to blame it on now, so they don't blame the bankers.
How's it gone down in Wales, all this? Because you've had to do quite a lot of locking down, particularly here in South Wales.
We're not happy at all. Like, I mean, making people wear these masks as well, it doesn't work. Like, they say it's like asking a fly not to fly through a fence. These masks are ridiculous. Like, even if you cough, you still cough through the mask. So them saying it doesn't spread, stops the spread of it is bullshit. It's a case-demic now, it's not a pandemic. We've got loads of cases on a test that doesn't work. 93% of the time it doesn't work. He said on the news that it's a 7% accuracy, it means 93% of the time it doesn't work.
So do ordinary people like you and I have a chance against the government, the system? Actually, it's an international thing, isn't it?
We've just got to have civil disobedience now. When they're making rules that don't make any sense at all and actually damaging us, the amount of death the actual lockdown is causing now is far outnumbering the actual COVID deaths. And when you put people with COVID-19 in a place where all the vulnerable people are, which is a normal hospital instead of an isolated facility, what do you expect? That's a no-brainer. Common sense. It's just common sense has been robbed by all these politicians. It's not been robbed. They just give themselves a $3,000 pay rise now. It's just ridiculous. Like, you know what I mean? We're all struggling. They just spent $12 billion on a track and trace system that's run on an Excel spreadsheet. Where's that money gone? It's not gone on that track and trace system. People are pocketing money. And that's what this is about. How can I sell CBD? Yeah? And these people now, they're interested in vaccine companies. They're telling people you can't go back to normal unless you had a vaccine. That's like me telling people you can't go back to normal unless you had a bottle of CBD. They got financial interests. They should never have any financial interest on decisions that affects the whole population, especially when it comes down to health. And they're giving themselves no liability with it as well. I'm going against what all the scientists are recommending as well, no? The scientists are recommending no more lockdowns, you know what I mean? The lockdowns are killing people. We've got a massive backlog of cancer patients and all the other patients as well. We've just made the decision now that COVID patients are more important than cancer patients. And the cancer patients, 94% of them are over the age of 80. The cancer patients, they could be kids, like, you know?
Do you find that you're one of the only people that's saying this, or do you think there's a general sense of disquiet?
No, there's definitely an awakening happening now. I was the only one for a while, but now there's a shared load of people that's talking the same thing now. And before long, this crowd is going to, I'd say, 10 or 20 times itself in the next couple of months, because people are just tired of the bullshit, they're tired of the lies, and they just want their lives back, their lives.
My name is Mark Elliott. I'm here because basically, this is a fraud. The whole thing's a complete fraud. I've been researching this for the last 6 months, and a lot of things I've been suspected down the years on my research is actually real, and this isn't. This is all planned. That's why I call it a pandemic. Actually, look at my t-shirt, it says scandemic on there. I've never denied this, people are not dying. People die every day anyway. I've never denied that. But with regards to a virus, it is what it is. Yes, there's been something. People have died. In actual fact, it's been and gone in May anyway. What these speakers are saying on the stage has now become a case-demic. At the end of the day, if you're testing more people, natural common sense tells you end up with more numbers. So there's a very clever little switch of words about 2 months ago on the mainstream media. It went from deaths, because there weren't any, to cases. Now people are still buying into that. And another word they were using is with coronavirus or COVID-19 rather than of coronavirus. So a lot of people were dying of different causes, and they were marked down as COVID-19.
Where are we heading, and what is that wider plan?
It's a new world order, isn't it? You know, and it's like the new world order is actually set out, isn't it? It's set out with the UN. It's the Rockefellers. It's people who actually behind the scenes are running the whole world, have been for years, with money controlling us. And we've been led along a garden path. We're not really paying much attention to anything. All this has been going on. If you've got an inquisitive mind, curious mind, which I've always had, and you ask questions, you get answers. You know, that's what we learned everything as kids. And I've always had an inquisitive mind, and I've always thought, well, hang on a sec, that doesn't seem right. Do you know what? In actual fact, if it doesn't feel right, just your gut instinct, it generally isn't right.
Yeah.
This is why we're here today, is to actually to waken people up to actually take some action to stop where we go in, because if we don't stop where we go in, we're going down the wrong path completely. Planet depopulation, limited travelling, you know, it's all going to be controlled by these elite people, basically. I do believe that there's another force at work which is trying to offset that. Basically, we've got a battle going on between good and evil, basically, and I don't know about you, but I would want good to win rather than evil, and that's what I stand on it, to be honest with you. You know, I think this whole COVID thing is a setup for something else. What? Well, yeah, it's control of people, depopulation of the planet.
Okay, so that's, quite a lot of Vox Pops there, Martin, but this is the crowd, obviously very biased in one direction, but you can see there's quite a lot of passion there, people who are prepared to, you know, risk fines and all sorts for going down to a protest outside the Welsh Parliament.
Yeah, and, there's quite a lot of, there's a lot of distrust of authority, and quite rightly so. I mean,
to what extent do you think people are being steered in the direction of a controlled opposition, or rather than actually understanding what's going on and coming to their own conclusions?
Well, I think that what's happened about this is that the narrative that everybody was buying into is like some of the people there were saying, well, to begin with, it seemed that, you know, we were being told something that made sense, and we all bought into it. But we've gradually. Some people were skeptics from the very beginning. Some people have become more skeptical as time's gone on, and clearly, whatever happens now, we ain't going back to normal. Normal is finished. And there's going to be a massive economic crisis. There's no doubt about that. And as one of the people said, this economic crisis began before the COVID crisis began.
So is this a sort of beginning of the end game?
Yeah, well, we're reaching the inflection point.
What do you mean by that?
After World War I and World War II, you've got things like the 1929 crash. You've got World War II. We are at a similar inflection point. There is now going to be a struggle for hegemony in the global economy and in the global geopolitical situation.
So is it going to be a kind of Great Reset or a World War, do you think?
Well, I mean, Great Reset is simply a project of the powerful. And of course they're dressing it up. You heard Carl Schwab earlier talking about, well, we're going to have lots and lots of young people involved. So it's not just us billionaires. We're going to have lots of tame young people.
Well, it sounds like the tame young.
Tell us what
it sounds
what
like
we're doing,
Marvin Rees and his young Parliament. What do you call it? Young Parliament here in Bristol. You know, lots of young people tapped up to come along who are basically, pliable.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's going to happen in those terms is all of these people that go on about the Great Reset and about climate change and all the rest of it. I feel like screaming from the rooftops. The banks are bust, and we're about to go to war with Russia and China.
Several people there brought that up.
Oh yeah. Well, that's why. I mean, people are starting to question lots of different things, and that's a good thing.
It's good to see, isn't it, that they're down in Cardiff there, picking up all sorts of different perspectives on it, and able to actually decide which direction they think things are going. I did have a quick word with the police, a very quick word at the end. And they were saying effectively they thought it was reasonably well organised. So that was quite nice to hear from the South Wales Police, one of their unofficial spokespeople, who we're going to hear from now.
It seems okay to me, but obviously loads of people committing offences, which will be dealt with at a later date. So obviously we're here to make sure everyone's safe. There's obviously issues there.
So that was a very quick clip. He didn't really want to say much, and he rushed off. But one of the most interesting people I spoke to there was talking about what he believes is actually an enormous amount of test fraud. So in other words, people being sent positive results where they can't possibly have been positive. So let's have a listen to that now. And his main appeal here is for other people who have similar experiences, to get in touch with us, get in touch with him, and see if this is more widespread than he's experienced personally.
My name is Keith, and I'm a therapist. My wife is a school teacher. A friend of hers in school, one of the teachers, decided to apply for the test. On the morning, she was unable to attend due to the fact that the car wouldn't start, and about 14 days later received a communication to say that she'd need to self-isolate because she had tested positive. I've since heard of 6 other exact cases where the people had applied, and for a variety of reasons they were unable to attend because of work commitments, etc. And on all the cases they'd said they'd be tested positive. On one occasion, one of my patients, she said that a friend of her father's, his wife had had a letter to say that she tested positive and she had died 2 years ago.
Well, that's just silly talk, pub talk.
It's based on personal experience, and if this goes out to other people, I would ask them, have they had a similar experience?
Where do you think we're heading with all this lockdown stuff?
Well, as everybody knows, this is based on fear. We're heading towards compulsory vaccinations. I personally would say there are 75 million reasons not to get vaccinated, because that's how much the British vaccination compensation has had to pay out to the people that have died, been injured or permanently damaged through the chemical contaminants in vaccinations. This year's flu shot, by the way, contains dog kidney cells. Dogs naturally harbour a form of the coronavirus, so anybody that's had the flu shot this year will automatically test false positive for the coronavirus this year. Professor Carl Hennigan in the Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford recently stated that in order to test for the efficiency of a virus or a vaccine, then you need to look at the error rate. This government has refused to say what their error rate is, and he has postulated that the error rate, if the error rate is as low as 0.1%, given the fact that there are no more deaths or very low admissions to hospital, then at least 50% of all those tested will be false positive. Dr. Mike Yeadon, who's the former chief scientific advisor for Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, has said if the error rate is 1%, then they're all false positive. The other person that I would really listen to is a wonderful lady that I met in Trafalgar Square on the 29th of August, and she is called Professor Dolores Cahill. She's a top epidemiologist and virologist, and she has worked for the Max Planck Institute for 20 years. She's also said that if anybody is concerned about their health, to take some hydroxychloroquine, 200 milligrams, 1 or 2 tablets, which coincidentally cost 10 pence. It's been tested by over 500 doctors in this country with a 99% cure rate.
Okay, well, not the BCFM politics show fact check. Actually, no, apparently it's 50 pence, not 10 pence for a tablet of chloroquine. But Martin, I mean, this is a pretty interesting allegation, evidence we're getting from this chap. He's saying that people are getting positive tests when they haven't even been tested.
Yeah, because the test and trace system is an absolute scandal, isn't it? It's basically they've scammed loads of money out of the taxpayer, and they've not done the job that they claim to be doing. So there's there's wide understanding of that, whatever your views about coronavirus.
Here we've got the possibility of companies like Serco, whoever's running these centres. In fact, we've had a scandal, I believe, this week as well, where people who are completely unqualified were being employed in these labs. There's an article in the Independent Coronavirus Health and Safety Breaches at Testing Lab. The watchdog has found material breaches in 5 areas at the coronavirus lab, handling 40,000 tests a day, which doesn't sound like you're going to end up with getting accurate tests out of a place like that. one of the whistleblowers there says at the induction he felt he was surrounded by people who didn't know anything about biosafety or handling infectious pathogens. These people don't realise they're in harm's way, and it's quite easy and straightforward to train them. They're not, and this is what is so deplorable. So they're not being trained, these people. He said he saw a complete overloading of the biosafety cabinets, and when you do that, the airflow has nowhere to go. They had racks full of tubes plonked right in the front grate, and I saw that numerous times, so people were getting no protection whatsoever. I'm convinced they were putting themselves at risk of infection. They didn't know it because they haven't been properly trained. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? If people are actually getting infected in these labs, then they could be also contaminating the tests. But there's no actual checks being done on this. It's called the UK Biocentre that runs this particular, I think it's called Lighthouse Biosafety Centre. So partly because this has been privatised, this whole thing, this is all considered commercially confidential and it can't be scrutinised.
Yeah, well, I think whatever your views on what's happening with coronavirus, the fact that Dido Harding, whose husband is a Tory MP who's on the record of saying he wants to get rid of the National Health Service, has been put in charge of so-called NHS Test and Trace, which is now being run for private profit, is absolutely, and of course that's the sort of thing that's going to happen. They've actually trained, you've got local local authority, test and trace teams already in place who've been talking to people for years, like catching AIDS, catching, stuff like that, and they've not been used. Although now, of course, they're talking about, well, they're going to give some of the test and trace activity to local authorities as part of the deals they're trying to do with northern mayors and so on. You feel like saying, well, why didn't you do that from the get-go? I mean, the obvious place to run test and trace from is from GP surgeries, for example. Why aren't GP surgeries?
That's a very good question. This place I was talking about in the Independent article is the whistleblowers who worked at the Lighthouse Laboratory in Milton Keynes. Basically, they thought the place was unsafe, so they left. And just to think that the results that are coming out of this place can mean an absolute cascade of problems for people. For example, that they have to isolate, and the people they've been in contact with for the past week or whatever have to isolate as well. And if they don't, they get whatever it is, £1,000 or even up to £10,000 fine.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's stable door horse bolted, isn't it, with a lot of this stuff. I think the real test is whether we've got more hospitalisations and more deaths. And I think that is moving in the wrong direction, which is what's making people, that's what the mainstream are saying. It's moving in the wrong direction. What can we do to stop this?
It's creeping up, certainly, but it's certainly nothing like that enormous great lump when we had this back in March and April.